In 1994, a team of researchers walking the bone-dry desert of southern Peru found something that didn't fit the story most of the world already believed about the ground beneath their feet. Scattered across the same plateau covered in the famous Nazca Line, the enormous geoglyphs of a hummingbird, a monkey, a spider, hundreds of perfectly straight lines running for miles across the desert floor, they kept finding spiral-shaped stone structures sunk deep into the earth, leading down to something that had nothing to do with astronomy, aliens, or any ceremonial mystery at all. They led down to water. For decades, the Nazca Lines had been one of the most famous unexplained sights on Earth, repeated in documentaries and books as evidence of ancient astronauts, landing strips for spacecraft, or a message meant to be read from the sky by beings who could fly. The real explanation turns out to be a lot less alien and considerably more impressive. The Nazca people who carved these lines into the desert over 2,000 years ago weren't leaving a message for the sky. They were engineering a way to survive one of the driest places on the planet, and the lines were only ever part of a much larger, much more practical system. If real archaeology solving popular myths is why you're here, subscribe and turn on notification. We go looking for the next one every week. The Nazca culture flourished in the coastal river valleys of southern Peru from roughly 100 BC to 800 AD, in a region that receives, in some years, functionally no rainfall at all, one of the driest deserts on Earth, sitting in the rain shadow created by the Andes to the east. The rivers that do exist in this region are seasonal, fed by mountain runoff, and for much of the year they run completely dry on the surface, even while water continues flowing underground through the same channels. Surviving in this environment, let alone building a complex, long-lasting civilization, required solving a single, unforgiving problem. How do you access water that's there, technically, but hidden beneath dry riverbed for most of the year? The Nazca answer was an engineering system called puquios, and it's genuinely one of the most sophisticated pieces of ancient hydraulic engineering found anywhere in the world. Rather than digging simple wells, Nazca engineers constructed spiraling stone-lined access shafts called ojos, descending down to the level of the underground water table, connected to long horizontal filtration galleries that tapped directly into the aquifer and channeled water toward the surface even during the driest months. Researchers studying the surviving puquios, more than 30 of them, are still functioning today, still used by local farmers, nearly 2,000 years after they were built, have documented an engineering approach so effective that some of these systems provide more reliable water access during drought years than modern alternatives introduced far more recently. This isn't a reconstructed guess about ancient technology. It's a working system, still in daily use, that modern hydrologists have studied, and in more than one case, actively recommended local communities continue relying on. And this is where the lines themselves come back into the story, because a growing body of archaeological research increasingly suggests the geoglyphs weren't a separate mystery from the puquios at all. They were connected to the same underlying concern: water, its location, and the ritual and practical activity organized around securing it. Archaeologist Rosa Lassapanara and colleagues, along with earlier foundational work by researchers including Johann Reinhard, have documented that a significant number of Nazca lines converge on or near natural springs, puquios, and other water sources, functioning less like isolated art and more like a coordinated system of markers and pathways. Some lines appear to have served as processional routes, walked based on soil compaction evidence found along many of them, not viewed from above, since flight obviously didn't exist for the people walking them. Ceramic fragments, deliberately smashed rather than simply discarded, have been found scattered along numerous line pathways, consistent with the kind of ritual offering practices documented in other Andean water veneration traditions, both before and after the Nazca period. In a culture living in one of Earth's driest deserts, where the difference between a good water year and a catastrophic one was the difference between survival and starvation, water wasn't just a practical resource. It was, by every reasonable archaeological reading, sacred. It's worth being fair to the earlier researchers, whose work first brought the Nazca lines to global attention, because the water and ritual explanation doesn't erase everything they found, it builds on it and reframes it. Maria Reich, the German mathematician who dedicated much of her life beginning in the 1940s to studying, measuring and protecting the lines from destruction, proposed that many of the larger geometric lines aligned with astronomical events, particularly solstices and star risings, and some of those specific alignments have held up reasonably well under the later, more rigorous statistical testing, even as the broader claim that the entire site functioned primarily as a giant astronomical calendar has. What later research increasingly suggests is that astronomical observation and water-focused ritual weren't competing explanations. For an agricultural society entirely dependent on predicting seasonal water availability, tracking celestial cycles to anticipate rainy seasons, and river flow timing is itself a practical water management tool, not a separate mystical pursuit distinct from survival. The animal figures, the hummingbird, the monkey, the spider, the killer whale, are older and less well understood than the long straight lines and geometric shapes. And it's here that real, still unresolved archaeological questions genuinely remain, which is worth being honest about, rather than overselling a complete solved mystery. Some researchers connect specific figures to known Nazca ceramic and textile imagery associated with water and fertility symbolism. The monkey, for instance, appears in other Nazca and broader Amazonian contexts associated with rain-calling ritual. Others argue for more localized, clan-specific meanings that may never be fully recoverable, given how much of Nazca oral tradition and religious practice was never written down and didn't survive Spanish colonization. This is a genuinely live area of research, not a fully closed case, and any documentary claiming total certainty about every individual figure's specific meaning is overstating what the evidence actually shows. What is not seriously disputed anymore, among the archaeologists and hydrologists who've done the fieldwork, is that the ancient astronaut explanation, popularized in the mid-20th century, most famously by Erich von Däniken's 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, has no serious archaeological support and was never based on anything more than the visual impression the lines make from an altitude no ancient Nazca person could have achieved, combined with a flawed assumption that a Bronze Age equivalent society, without metal tools or the wheel, couldn't possibly have planned, measured, and executed large-scale ground art without either flight or outside help. Modern experimental archaeology has demonstrated repeatedly that the lines could be, and almost certainly were, laid out using simple surveying methods, stakes, and cord, entirely achievable from ground level by people who understood their landscape with a precision modern researchers are still working to fully appreciate. The Nazca civilization itself didn't survive indefinitely. Paleoclimate research points to a severe extended drought beginning around 500 to 600 AD as a major factor in the culture's eventual decline and the abandonment of some settlements, a pattern that should sound familiar by now. A sophisticated society, brilliantly adapted to a specific environment, ultimately vulnerable to exactly the resource it had spent centuries learning to manage. But the puquios they engineered didn't die with them. Local Peruvian farmers in the Nazca Valley still walk down into some of those same spiral stone shafts today, drawing water from underground channels dug by hand 2,000 years ago, using a system that modern engineering has never found a compelling reason to fully replace. The lines are still there too, visible now from satellites and drones in a way no Nazca engineer ever could have anticipated, ironically finally giving researchers the god's eye view that ancient astronaut theorists insisted the lines were originally built for. What that aerial perspective has actually revealed, the more carefully it's been studied, isn't a landing strip or a message to the stars. It's a map drawn by people walking, not flying, of exactly where water was, where it needed to be found, and how a civilization in one of the driest places on Earth built an engineering system, and eventually an entire visible language into the ground, trying to make sure it never ran out.